Okay, so thank you everybody for being here. Actually, let me turn this video on so you can see me this way too. So this session is called Engage Design, Assignment Design, a Thinking About Games Approach to Teaching with AI. And I want to start by just clarifying some things.
You're very echoey, so is your laptop speaker on?
No, it's not. That's just in case. How about now? Is it still echoey?
Let me ask the people.
Zoom people, am I echoing? I'll turn this camera off. Annie, how does it sound on your side? Is it pretty echoey? You good? Okay, I think it's good. Sweet, thanks, Rob. Okay, so we'll start by just clarifying some terms. There are lots of cool sessions, so if you'd like to scoot to something else, it would not hurt my feelings. So this is really an inquiry-based session. I promise no best practices. I will promote no specific AI tools. I do not have a slide deck. I do have a 2-sheet handout, which if you're in the room, you can go ahead and scan that QR code. If you're in Zoom, here is the link to the doc. You can grab this. I'm hoping for this to be dialogic, right? And so really what I've structured here is some thinking about how I think about games, how I think about teaching, how I think about assignment design, how I see these things echo each other, not being the same thing, but being like tangential or sort of paralleling each other. And so what I'm gonna walk us through is a starting premise, a claim about assignments and what we do as teachers. I then want to introduce you to 4 thinkers who, if I were to choose 4 people to sit down and say, okay, I'm having all this AI stuff happen in my classroom. What do you all think I should do? It would be these 4 thinkers, okay? C.P. Nguyen, who is a philosopher who wrote Games, Agency as Art, who is asking, why do humans play games? And more than just because they tell stories, it's because there's something rich and there's something pleasurable, but also beautiful when we play games. So C.P. Nguyen is someone I'm wanting to introduce you to, part of this dialogue. Sharang Biswas is a games designer who's doing a lot of work clarifying representation in the LGBTQ space in games. It is well known for his game Feast, as well as other works. And then some non-games people, Zaretta Hammond, who many of us may be more familiar with, whose work around culturally responsive teaching and neuroscience is really powerful in thinking about engagement and growth. And then Todd Zakransky, who is one of the editors on the newest edition of the seminal work, Classroom Assessment Techniques. These classroom assessment techniques are so ubiquitous that you may be using them and not realize they've come from this sort of text and in one or other of its editions. So what I'm offering is kind of a dialogue between these thinkers, all right, which will help us refine this early claim I'm going to make about teaching and assignment design. And I want us to use that together to think about how we might reimagine some specific assignments that are kind of common and go-to, in particular, asynchronous discussions. I think a lot of us use asynchronous discussions, and I think AI is causing a lot of interesting problems with asynchronous discussions. So essentially, I want to build a framework and then together look at that particular assignment to see if that framework is useful, see what we come up with, and then we'll kind of widen the aperture again with some larger questions we could apply to other assignments in addition to discussion boards. Does that sound okay? Okay. And if that doesn't sound okay, there are so many other sessions right now that you could pop out and go do. Okay? All right. So like I said, if you're just coming in the room, if you would like to join me in this doc, you can scan that QR code in the corner, and that's just going to sit there the whole time. And if you are new in Zoom, Robin, would you mind reposting the link to the Google Doc?
They don't have the code out here for your session, Curry, on the door.
Okay, so would you remind me of that, the QR code on the way, so we don't miss that on the way out. We'll make sure that, yeah, folks can get that.
Went next door, but that's a different
Okay.
thing, so I don't want to sign it.
So I'm gonna talk for like 10 minutes and then we'll go somewhere interesting. So here's my starting premise. All academic tasks are artificially constructed situations that rely on certain constraints to place students in situations that assign them a role that by design leads students to engage in interesting learning actions. My friend Daniel Contreras, I do a lot of work with him. We're building a lot of pedagogy around games stuff. And Daniel says something like, he doesn't teach, he designs situations for his students, right? And so this is the kind of thinking that's underlying this premise. And then also attached to this claim is that AI has broken a lot of these traditional constraints for things like the academic essay or the asynchronous discussion board. So the go-to challenge we would have relied on before that students would have met in interesting ways is now circumvented by these tools. So what I want to walk us through is some thinking about games to see how, if that's fruitful for us to think about designing our teaching stuff, okay? So first person I want to introduce you to is Siti Nguyen. He says we play games because the world is chaos, because there's way too many values and way too many goals competing for our attention and or problems that are so insurmountable that they just paralyze us. But in games, game designers model a part of the real world in a way that makes the values crystal clear, that makes the goals crystal clear, that assigns a role to you that you understand, that presents challenges to you that are right at the cusp of your ability so that you know what's important, you know what you're supposed to do, you know how you're supposed to do it, and you can try until you achieve it. And that this is the pleasure of all games, games that match you in your abilities like this. And so it's not that games necessarily are something we escape into to get away from the world. Siti Nguyen argues that games are something we go into to gain tools to deal with the world. That when you do something in a role that you're just able to make decisions about and execute those decisions, you're actually engaging in agency. Like, I choose to do this, and whether it's a failure or success is not as important as I choose to do it. I can manifest that choice in the game. That choice is validated. And if I fail, I learn from it and I try again. Does that make sense? And all games that match this ability and assign this role and give you this crystallized clarity are games that we find pleasurable. So this is Siti Nguyen's argument. Sharon Biswas adds to this, but with a bit of a critique. Sharon teaches, actually all of these folks that I'm looking at are teachers. So Siti Nguyen, he's also teaching, is also thinking about this in terms of teaching, but Biswas is a little bit critical of, like he takes Siti Nguyen's point and complicates it. Let me say it that way. In other words, okay, if we recognize that games offer us this pleasure, it doesn't mean that everything should suddenly become a game, right? Because games are culturally responsive. Because, and this is something Sharon Biswas says very clearly, he says there's no such thing as intuition. There's no such thing as an intuitive design that every single person can navigate. Instead, there's a shared expectation around, let's say, a controller or a game structure. And if it's familiar enough, like cards, but with some nuanced rules, I can catch it. And I might say, oh, this is very intuitive. I'm learning it on my own. I'm kind of putting it together. I understand how this game works. But that relies on a culturally situated prior knowledge about that kind of thing. Does that make sense? So I want to be careful in this, as we're building up this sort of framework for thinking about teaching, that I'm not arguing for gamification. I'm arguing for thinking about how games work. And I'm arguing for, let's take that thinking and apply it to our assignments. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, and so a natural sort of bridge from Biswas to Hammond is that thinking about intuition and what's intuitive and what's culturally situated. Zaretta Hammond has done a lot of work around culturally responsive teaching, and a lot of her newer stuff, and she has a new book coming out, is, and she uses this phrase, trying to close the doing gap. And so instead of, and what she means by that is a lot of us have done work in our classes to make our classes more reflective and inviting to students and a range of students in our classes. But it's possible, Hammond argues, that we might have content that when our students look at that content, they see themselves. We might have that content, but we might still be practicing an assignment design that's about compliance, right? And so being culturally responsive requires the teacher to respond to the students. It's not enough to just sort of change up the text or change up the design of my course, but grade the same way or grade really late or structure things traditionally. Does that make sense? If I'm not hearing what my students are doing and getting in there to respond to them. Zaretta Hammond's one of her refrains she says often is that to really engage culturally responsive teaching is to do hard work as teachers, right? It's not enough to just sort of like get a couple strategies, plug them in, and then go, right? And so it's this it's thinking about course design, but it's also thinking about how do I know exactly where my students are? And to make a quick connection, back to Siti Nguyen, if game designers position the player right at the edge of their abilities, we can do that as teachers with our students if we're checking in with them, knowing where they are with their abilities, right? So that's the real question. If we're being responsive with each of our students, I know where you're at, I can get you here. But you are here, I can get you here. Does that make sense? So what will we have to, so it's a design thing, but it's also a teacherly practice thing that we're talking about here. And so that brings us to these classroom assessment techniques that Socrates in his newest edition of this book help us to think about. Do you know about CATS?
Like the
Cats,
transit
like
dog chase?
Exactly. So classroom assessment techniques. Do you in your classes ever do this with your students? Like you've gone through a lecture kind of nonsense, like a thing that I'm doing right now, and you see blinky eyes and you say, okay, talk to each other about the muddiest point. You do the muddiest point. Okay, so this is like a codified classroom assessment technique from one of these editions of this book. So like I said, these are so ubiquitous that a lot of us do these things without realizing like where these come from. But what's great about classroom assessment techniques is they're formative in their nature. They're not about summative assessment. They're not about points. They're not about grades. They're about your abilities and this challenge. And how are you in terms of those two things? And what can I do to equip you or push you or to pull you aside because you need a break, whatever that might be. Does that make sense? Okay, so if I put all this together, and if our original premise was thinking about what we do in the class, that there's these sort of artificially constituted situations that students engage to do learning, and they're kind of broken now. If I put these four voices together, I revise my premise to be this. Teaching is a medium. And we design things in this medium of teaching. These things are artificial, they always have been. This means they also embed our values and our goals, right? Just like games embed values and goals, when we build teaching things, we embed our values and our goals in them. And while they may be responsive to or demand compliance from students who use them, they will always shape formatively those who take them up as regular tasks. And what I mean by that is, if I teach something that at this point my students, our expectations aren't necessarily aligned and they're constantly using something to circumvent it, I'm still training them. I'm still shaping their experience as a student to do this when that kind of thing comes up in another class. Does that make sense? And so no matter what, if I've designed something to be responsive and I'm in that space being responsive, or if I'm demanding compliance, either way, students will be shaped formatively by the things they take up in my class as regular tasks, right? And then finally, recognizing that the things that we create in teaching mediums are artificial means we can tweak them, we can change them, and we can create new things too. So that's kind of the premise of where I'm working from in this session. What do we think? Does that make sense? Muddiest point?
This is exactly what I'm trying to do this semester in my labs. I'm
Yeah.
trying to find a way to make them open-ended.
Okay.
Right? Instead of the lab being like, follow the steps to reach the end, I'm like, instead, how do you apply the idea from the lab in a novel way that demonstrates some personal expression?
Absolutely. Cool.
You invite us to go up to 20,000 feet, take a look at what we're doing, let go of our treasured typical assignments and say it's a game, create some new games. It's not only a game, but so you're welcoming us to think about this.
Yep. And thank you for that. And I meant to say this earlier, and because I do want to be careful. When we take ourselves up high and we start reevaluating, and that's where I'm going to take us next, to evaluate our teaching practices and our go-to assignments. I think that can feel threatening. It can feel irritating. It can feel like noise sometimes. And so I want to clarify that I value all expressions of pedagogy. I mean, think about this design of the room right now. We're not supposed to lecture, and It's more dynamic to teach in chairs that are designed in circles, right? But this pedagogical architecture situates students to do listening things. And what I wanted to do with this first part was to do some talking things and have you all do some listening things. So this is a powerful pedagogical situation. If when I'm checking in with you and responding to each other, we're not feeling lost or bored or not seen or heard in this discussion. Does that make sense? Okay, so if you hear and we start to challenge some go-to assignments or some go-to teaching moves, but please don't take that as threatening. One thing that Sharon Biswa says here is so interesting, and I didn't read these quotes on purpose, but he's talking about how games are good at modeling economies and how powerful it can be to have hands-on experience with economies. That's a way to learn them. But what is very clear to say here is that that's different than reading about economies, but not better than, right? And so I just want to clarify that what we're not talking about in this session is better forms of teaching, different forms of teaching for different situations when we need to respond to our students in that way. Is that okay? Okay. Okay, so all of that complexity, I've sort of simplified into this framework, which is misspelled. Gonna fix that because I'm an English teacher. Okay. So thinking about games as a heuristic, right? So again, not gamifying our stuff, but thinking about how games work and what we need to be careful about with games and on all the things. If we want to look at an assignment that students are not engaging the way we want them to, they constantly use AI in certain ways that we don't like or don't think is appropriate. These might offer us a problem-solving tool to think about, well, what is going on and what can I change or what can I create anew? So one of those parts of this heuristic is alignment. So do the tasks and the outcomes of our assignments reflect our students' values and goals? If I have a biology major in my biology class, already we share a goal. And if I put up some crazy challenge in front of my student, they're probably going to tackle it because we share this ultimate goal, right? It's like when basketball coaches send their players upstairs to run for miles, even though there's no stairs in basketball ever. So you'll never need the skill of running upstairs in basketball. Basketball players agree that the muscles all build and the jumping is important. Does that make sense?
And that footwork.
And that footwork, right? Right? So if our students are aligned around values and goals, they're probably going to engage our assignments the way we hope they will, the way we expect them to. If that isn't aligned, if I'm setting some goals that are not aligned with my students' goals or similar with values, that might be breaking some things. So that's one thing. If I have an assignment that's not working, I might think about this. Constraints. So what learning actions are made possible by the rules and requirements of our conventional assignments? So the academic essay, the topic sentence followed by evidence stuff, followed by some kind of reasoning stuff. Okay, those constraints I put on my students. Okay, you have all these wonderful things, but you need to put them in this order, right? I want them to do that because the learning action that manifests is now a logic, right? I learn to think in subordination. I understand that this idea should become first and these things go after, right? Does that make sense? Okay, well, is that important? I would say, yeah, I think logical thinking is important. So I might hang on to that constraint, but posting once and replying twice, well, we can question that in a minute because that's a constraint, right? It's like, if I ask you post a certain amount of words and then reply twice, that constraint affords a engagement action. I have to read my classmates' posts. But is that constraint leading to interesting things or is that constraint leading to boring things or something else? Does that make sense? Okay, roles. Do our students feel confident in the roles we've assigned them? And how do we calibrate each challenge according to each student's ability? When I assign something, does my student know exactly what I'm asking them to do? Just like a game, it tells you, okay, you're gonna go to the hoop, but the constraint is you have to dribble along the way, right? If they understand that and they feel they have the abilities to do that, it becomes fun. They will do it over and over again. They'll want to master it. In my class, do my students always know exactly what it is I'm asking them to do? Or is that clouded? Okay, does that make sense? And then the last one is formative experiences. And this one I think is the most important thing. How do the processes students take up in our assignments develop skills and shape routines reflective of the values of our shared disciplines and cultures? And this is Zaretta Hammond's challenge to being culturally responsive. I might say, I want all students to write grammatically correct sentences because there's a standardization of the language that I think is important for them to be able to do professionally. But my students constantly surprise me with language that I haven't seen before, but that is highly expressive or highly logical or manifests a climactic conclusion that breaks or bends those standards. And so what do I do as a teacher, right? Do I not accept those? Do I grow with my students? Does that make sense? And if I'm constantly telling my students to stop it, right? How is that shaping them? How is that developing their skills? Does that make sense? Okay, yes.
Oh, there's a comment in the chat from our joyful teacher.
What is he saying?
He's saying that you wanted to mention that these classroom assessment techniques are a great thing to use AI for.
Yes.
We can use tools like PlayLab to create interactive ones that we can browse through and access them where our students are.
Awesome. Thank you, Jim. That's exactly what I was thinking too. Okay, so when I think about AI, these are the four sort of spaces my brain goes. My students use AI in ways that I don't think is appropriate because we don't share the same goals for this assignment. My goal is that you will learn to become a logical thinker. Your goal is to get an A, just to get an A, just to get through my class, right? The constraints that I put on my assignment, if students use AI, is because reading takes a lot of time. And if you don't have a lot of time to read, you're going to use the tool that makes this task efficient to get it done. Does that make sense? Okay. And if I'm like, no, you're not reading the right way. Okay. It's the constraint that's causing the AI use. Does that make sense? Okay. So I can think about, roles. Students use AI when I do an assignment, like I have an assignment that's kind of murky or they're not quite sure what to do. So they plug it in and the AI produces something and I've got something, so they put it in. Okay. And if that's how I teach, their use of AI in that way will be the thing that develops their skill set, that shapes them.
Graham, looking at the roles, where you say, do our students feel confident in the roles we assign them, and how do we cover each challenge according to each student's ability? When I'm creating an assignment, often I try to create it to be as broad as possible in terms of students' abilities. I don't necessarily have different assignments based upon where the student ability is or what type of grade they want to go for. I try to pick an assignment that will kind of take them wherever they're at. Can you comment on that? Because this seems to imply that I should have it lined up.
Yeah. So I think by roles, I am thinking of my assignments and I'm asking myself, what is the role that this assignment sets students up to occupy or to perform? So a discussion board that asks for a quote. I'm setting my students up as researchers, as close readers, maybe as debaters. Does that make sense? Right? Okay. But if I haven't set something up before that to like, how do you do research? Or what do you do when you're encountering a debate? Then they're entering into that space being asked to perform a role that I haven't actually sort of set them up to do well.
So you're specifying a level that they should be able to come in confident as a whole group. It's not like you're saying, student A, here's a more complicated task because this is lining up to you. Rather, you're saying you're defining it so everyone can come in and they're ready to go. And I just wanted to clarify and understand that.
No, but I like that because that introduces complexity, and I think that that's right. So, for example, and I teach rhetoric and analysis and that kind of stuff. So I'll have a common assignment that's like, here's a music video that has an ambiguous meaning. Interpret the meaning. Mm-hmm. And a student that's just new to analysis will make observations that some of us might say are surface level. But if the goal of the task is just close reading, it's not deep analysis, it's just close reading, that's fine. They're doing the role, they're doing the task, right? But the student that has a lot of experience with analysis is going to go deep no matter what. They're still doing the close reading stuff, but they're also doing more. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so you're specifying for as much as possible for everyone to be able to do the assignment successfully.
Exactly.
A wide zone of proximal development.
100%. And so if it's an early assignment, it has a low floor that we can all step onto, but the assignment should also have a high ceiling. students that want to rise above and get into some great complexity, that role is the assignment affords that role too.
Yeah.
Right? Does that make sense? Yeah. But I don't want to just have a really high floor because then students can't step onto it. They don't know how to do it. Then the constraints are too challenging. And so they're going to circumvent it and use a tool that allows them to accomplish the task. Why wouldn't they? They're savvy students. Yeah. Does that make sense? Okay. Any other questions about these as a framework? Because we're going to apply it in a second. And I'm going to stop talking a little bit.
Is there a reflection phase at the end or a kind of a recircle back around?
Like you're thinking about process.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, yes. I mean, 100%. I'm seeing this less as a mapped out process, but more of like elements of design, principles, maybe.
Now, do you typically give the same rules assignment to everyone, or do you kind of ever break up into groups? Like, be like, okay, these guys, they were just not gonna mess around with dribbling. You guys are going straight to alley-oops.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, depending on what the goal is, right? Okay, let's play with it because I think if we play with it, then maybe some more questions will emerge. So what I want us to do, and I want us to chat with each other, we're gonna do this for like 10 minutes or so. I want you to apply this to our typical class asynchronous discussion assignment. Okay, and so here's 3 versions. The classical kind of discussion assignment is post once, 250 words, reference a source, reply twice, take up a claim or a question from a classmate and advance its inquiry. That's kind of a go-to vanilla, talk to each other online, do it like that. Here's maybe a redesigned discussion board. So post only once, smaller constraint, and reference your own prior work. So there's some building before this, right? Okay. And then by the semester's end, reply 25 times only when you feel compelled. Not twice every single time, but when you feel invited in, when you want to do some replying. Okay, there's that one. Here's another version. So not even paragraphs, not even word counts, but like list one main thing and 6 sub things expressed in this content. And the content is right there. Okay, whatever it is, a music video, a new theorem, something like this. Infer the rule structuring this formula from that formula's rules. So we last week learned how this formula works and its syntax and how the rules that govern it. Here's a new one, but based on the old one, infer what the rules are for this one.
You lost me.
Huh?
You lost me.
Okay, so subordinate, okay, I'm trying not to.
Second one, infer.
Yeah. So why do you use commas in a certain way when you join 2 sentences together with an and word? Why do you use commas in a different way when you join sentences together with a when word, right? So if I know the rules from one, can I infer the rules from another? Present a puzzle to them, in other words. Here's another version. Curate 3 insights from your classmates' posts from last week to test this new concept we're studying this week. So go backwards and find 3 students' things. We're doing this new thing. How do they help us test this new concept? Okay, so I want you to talk about these 3 versions, but I want you to talk about them with respect to these sort of principles. Okay, how might one or the other align more with students? What are the different constraints you're seeing? What makes those constraints interesting or boring? What roles do these ask students to do differently? And then how are these shaping students? How are these giving students formative experience? How are they growing when they interact with these things? Okay, so if you're in the room, you can just chat with people sitting next to you. If you're in Zoom, I'm going to make 2 breakouts because I think that's enough. And then you can just hang out with like 3 or 4 people. So give me just a second to set that up.
And there was another Jim Sullivan comment, if you wanted to address it or not.
We'll do it when we get back.
I'm Christopher. Robert, nice to meet you. I teach computer science. Yeah. Please do, come on.
I'm also in staff.
Sorry.
Oh, thank you. Letters, what do you think? You know, this was some sort of an English assignment.
Computer science.
All right, everybody. 20 seconds. Finish up your conversation.
Eat some, I imagine that's if you take away like protein drinks and buy them shoes.
Okay.
That would be really interesting. Yeah, yeah. That sounds really interesting. Yeah, that sounds really interesting.
Hopefully I retain all of this.
I know, these days I'm like, I don't.
So thank you for your animated conversations. I appreciate the energy.
That sounds really interesting. That's like make my real start.
I'm gonna bring us back together now, just for the sake of time, so you have enough time to scoot to the next section.
Don't forget we didn't.
Yeah, so for sure what we're gonna do is we're gonna snap a selfie so that it is evidence that you all were here, but hopefully the QR code shows up on time. I want to get to Jim's comments about values in us before we're done. So let's structure, can we take a few minutes just to, if there is anything interesting you saw or considered with this, a couple minutes for that. We'll address Jim's comments and then I have some final words. So any interesting thinking about asynchronous discussions, these principles, AI stuff, any interesting that you'd like to share? It's totally cool if you don't.
I really like the idea on these word puzzles, how it makes the students like interdependent on each other. Because they have to go back and look at what somebody else had done and come up with. And so they're all building on each other's work.
Yeah.
That can be lazy.
So the role that this sets up is, okay, I was mildly interested in my own post. I really don't know what's going on in my classroom post. And you want me to say something? Okay, that's the role. So that's hard. This role, curate 3 insights. All I got to do is go copy, copy, copy. Well, here and here's the thing. If AI was used in the last post, and let's say even in a way that wasn't that interesting, but now you've situated your students as responding to that content. Now they are practicing that that choice making. They're practicing that agency. I choose this one, I choose this one, I choose this one. Here's why, because however it was written and whoever wrote it, it applies to this new concept in this interesting way, right? Okay, and so again, that's thinking about what is the role I assign my students, okay? What is the kind of the goal of the activity? And here, if the goal is interaction, the goal here is interaction, right? This interaction isn't landing quite as well, right? The user group of this situation I've created, they don't seem to be enjoying it as much. But if I experiment and I try new things, maybe there is more enjoyment there, right? Does that make sense? And yeah, go ahead, Tina. And
You were gonna say, and maybe you can build, maybe at the beginning of the semester, you might try a classic discussion board and then you might build to
100%.
some of the other ones.
Yeah, that's what we said.
Yeah, and then
I
we
was
were
like, you're-
also,
Yeah, go ahead.
one other thing, rather than have something at the end of the semester, we thought maybe at the end of the unit, just to not wait to the
Yeah.
last bits of the semester to get
Procrastinators.
going. So that was another thought we were discussing too.
Yeah, why start at like thinking of these? Like I think of alignment when you say we should start with the classic because students like already kind of expect, they're already, does that make sense? And then bend things with them as you go forward and they'll follow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And by the way, the
Yeah.
QR code is working on my device.
But it's
to-
not others?
I don't know, did somebody say the QR code?
Oh,
Oh, the one outside, oh, okay.
Attendance.
Oh, yeah,
There's
yeah,
not one for
Oh,
our
okay.
door.
Do you wanna do it on there?
There was one.
No, we just had a very dynamic conversation just because she's in biology. And so I was like, give me an example of things that you discuss, in an online setting. It's like, oh, there's a unit on muscles. And I was like, oh, muscles.
Yeah.
So the first one could be something like how you can use, or why use regular protein to build muscles. And I just brought in my son's perspective who loves protein shakes. And that's what reminds me, like, by the time we get to the end, the students are bringing in their own knowledge about muscles, whatever, if that was a
Totally.
unit, right?
Yeah,
So I like
exactly.
all 3 embedded in one unit, because it's,
That's cool.
yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so I want to address, so Jim's comment was pushing back a little bit on this notion of aligning values. And he says, sometimes we are trying to challenge and complicate our students' values and understandings, and there needs to be space for that. And I appreciate that. I think that's right. I use the example of hard work. I value hard work. and my class embeds that value of hard work in a lot of my assignments, that actually is something I hope my students gain from me, is that kind of, a work ethic. But that can be really problematic if a student is caring for loved ones or is at a job they have to attend to. And I've assigned this reading, which requires not just time, but labor, right? It doesn't mean I'm gonna stop valuing hard work and start and sort of like relieve students of assignments that I think are important, but it means I need to think about that value and how it manifests in my course in more complicated ways. And I know, Jim, I know you're nudging us towards other ideologies that are important to think about, and I think that's important. With 4 minutes left, I'm just gonna kind of say thank you and scoot us towards something else. I wish we had more time to really unpack that. So I wanna say a couple quick things. AI circumvents our assignments, and if we go back to games, there are games that we play. Think of a sports team that has struggled all season, has lost every single game, and that suddenly, for some random reason, is matched with another team that is far inadequate compared to them. And they have this game that's completely broken, where the points are just completely outpaced, everyone's scoring. It's amazing. Does that make sense? That can be fun. It is true that when some things break games that you've been striving for, that can be a suddenly really fun experience, to suddenly be so powerful in executing the agency you've been trying to execute for a really long time. And I think for a lot of our students, specifically underrepresented or historically marginalized students, for them to have a tool that suddenly allows them to do an assignment at a level that they've never been able to do before, there is a bit of fun there. There is a bit of power there that they're accessing. Does that make sense? Okay. So I think that's the other side of this. So my assignment is broken. Okay, is that a good thing in this case? Or when is this assignment being broken a good thing for a student? That's again thinking in response to, being responsive to students' interactions. Does that make sense? Okay. And so again, I'm thinking about this in complicated ways, not suggesting let's gamify everything, not saying let's fix all the constraints again in our assignments so students do what we want them to do. It's all of it, right? So I want to leave you with these broader questions. Again, we haven't talked about any specific AI tool, and that was not my point, but here are some larger questions we could apply to AI tools that might get us thinking about particular use cases using this framework I've shared with you. And I'm not going to read through all of these, but I'll just pick one or two. What have ubiquitous AI tools introduced to all of our experiences with engaging content? How does this shift expectations? What new routines and habits are forming? How many of us sit down and read books every day? Maybe we do. Absolutely. You do it as often as another part of your life? Has that kind of shifted on you a little bit? How many of us, when we go to write in spaces, every time it suggests something with a red squiggly line, we correct it right away? Or how many of us turn that off? Or how many of us love when it finishes our sentences and we're, yes, that's what I wanted. Yes, that's what I wanted. Yes, that's what I wanted. These things continue to become ubiquitous. They continue to emerge, and it's going to shift all our expectations. If I make my students write by hand and they've never done that before because I think that this is somehow more authentic, do you hear what I'm saying? Okay, so I'm not going to give you all of these, but these are those larger questions about AI or technologies in general, given different assignment situations, different learning based on that framework. Real quick, in my last minute, I just want to give you a guide to using this 2-pager if you choose to keep it. This is to Jim's point earlier. CATs or classroom assessment techniques are really cool ways to position AI within a process, to situate AI tools within a learning situation. So it's fun to click on this list, and there's like 50 of them listed there. And just ask yourself, if I had students do this with AI, would that be interesting? No, maybe. This podcast with Sharon Biswas is all about verb things that games ask people to do. And as academics and as teachers, we also have verb things we want our students to do. We rank them according to a certain hierarchy that we're all familiar with. This can be interesting to listen to if you just, every time they say game, you think teaching or classroom. it's kind of, it's fun to play with, okay? So Biswas and Crysex are really good like applications, so tools that you might click on and explore for application. Hammond and Nguyen are more theory. So I've linked podcasts and I've also linked their books. I don't know why that's misspelled, I'll fix that later. Okay, so this is this handout. It's got some more resources you can explore later. And this is the last thing I want to leave you with. It's a quote from Nguyen, who says, "In so many games, the target isn't the point. The point is this rich experience along the way." And I think a lot of the mistakes we make with games is we get into these things and we forget about these larger purposes. The fact that they can be fun, the fact that they can be beautiful. We're just hyper obsessed and hyper narrow on the product at the end. This attention to product over process is poisoning us and making us miss out on possible pleasures. So it's about process. Okay. Thank you for coming to my session. Yes.
Does anybody need the QR code?
I do. How did you find it?
It was a